Hello, everybody. I'm Conquering History Games, and welcome to the first progress report, proper progress report, I'm going to be doing on Kalterkrieg, the Cold War mod for the Kaiserreich universe. So this is called Progress Report 2, but this is actually Progress Report 1, basically, because it's going to be Progress Report 1 goes over Canada, which is one of the two major uh, Cold War leaders in this universe. But it recently got revamped, so that would be Progress Report 12, which maybe if you guys want, let me know in the comments below if you'd like me to skip ahead and do Progress Report 12 before doubling back and beginning again at Progress Report 13, just so we can see what the two major players are. If not, the next video after this will be Progress Report 3 on Russia. And all of this stuff is going to be in a playlist, which should be linked in the description below, so shouldn't be too much of an issue. So this is a very long progress report covering a lot of information that's new to me, probably new to you if you're watching this. So I'm actually going to be doing something a little bit different this time. Usually the point of me doing these progress reports is to summarize the information for people and kind of maybe supplement the material. But since this is a new series of progress reports, unlike my Kaiserreich ones, I thought I would actually take this video in particular as a chance to I'm gonna turn that music down a little bit. It's Victorious 2 soundtrack, of course. I thought I would take this time to maybe do something different. So for this one, I'm actually going to literally read every word of the progress report, at least the first half of it, and maybe we'll talk about some of the pictures, but I want to see what you guys think about it, if you like me doing that or not. So please, please, please go in the comments and let me know if you want me to do it this way or not. So let's just talk about first the lore. I know we're going to be stuck on this picture for a while, but don't worry, there's more stuff coming. All right, here we go. The calm before the storm, 1936 to 1940. After 15 years of uninterrupted dominance, the German Empire was stagnating. The economy had stopped growing. Her allies were becoming overextended, and the Kaiser himself was ailing with growing senility. Reichskanzler Kuno von Westarp's government had completely steered the ship for 6 long years, and now the Empire was entering election season. Then Black Monday occurred. Almost overnight, what was left of the stagnant German and wider Middle European economy had collapsed, and the ruling conservatives had no plans with which to face such a crisis. Over the next few weeks, Germany would remain in a state of political deadlock as all parties scrambled to put forward their own recovery plans to heal the ailing nation. Economic Secretary Karl Hefferreich would begin instituting a relatively ambitious economic intervention plan by April, however. The damage had already been done. The DKP-DRP Zentrum alliance had lost much of its credulity, and as the electorate went to the polls, the nation appeared thoroughly divided. On the announcement of the results, the SPD-FVP-CSRP quote-unquote Democratic Union electoral alliance would shock the nation, securing an outright majority in the Reichstag. With no other options with which to form a government with, Wilhelm II appointed Otto Wels as Reichskanzler, enabling the formation of the first Social Democrat-led government in the history of the German Empire. The new economic secretary, Walter Rathenau, would begin to implement his own, far more radical recovery plan. Focused on increasing state control over the German economy, the Rathenauian also called for increased levels of taxation and, quite controversially, widespread cuts to military spending. Though vehemently protested by Chief of Staff Hans von Seeckt, his sudden death at the end of 1936 would allow the spending cuts to be carried out in earnest. Another of Welles's more controversial stances was his view of the growing strength of the Third Internationale. Rather than sharing the nationally prevailing view that syndicalism needed to be destroyed, the veteran politician pursued a d'entente with the Commune of France, with the most notable application of this policy being the Savoy crisis, where Germany refused to support the Swiss government. This d'entente foreign policy was generally hated by the German public. However, it did achieve its goals of reducing the tensions between Berlin and Paris, for a time anyway. By late 1939, however, tensions were on the rise again between the two countries. A spate of unrest among the German minority in Alsace, combined with a large communard military exercise in the Grand Est region, would further stoke Francophobic sentiment across the country. With his popularity plummeting, Otto Wels died suddenly on the 13th of September, leaving his government in a state of temporary paralysis. After a brief leadership convention, SPD rightist Karl Severing would succeed to the leadership of the party and become the next Reichschancellor, and would move to immediately reverse several of Welles's policies, triggering internal conflicts with the left wing of the Social Democrats. Within the 20-year time frame for the official occupation of Nancy, ending in November, Germany refused to withdraw. Severing's decision to stand firm against the communards would earn him the respect of the German people, but would bring the government's internal unity to an all-time low. As tensions continued to rise, the upcoming elections looked uncertain. However, Severing, a firm believer in democracy, ensured they went ahead. As German and French diplomats met in The Hague to attempt to defuse the crisis, the German people went to the polls. A conservative comeback would break the Democratic Union alliance over the Reichstag, with the Zentrum and NLP both making big gains. After a week of negotiation, Karl Severing would secure an alliance to allow Germany to weather the coming storm and present a united political front. The SPD, FVP, NLP, Zentrum, BVP Grand Coalition. With talks at The Hague progressing, if quite slowly, many would hope for peace in our time. However, this would be the calm before the storm. On June 25th, a tense standoff would take place in the square of the Palace Stanislas in Nancy. As German military police stared down an angry crowd of French-speaking workers, a gunshot rang out. A pistol had been fired from the crowd, and the captain commanding the German soldiers had been shot dead. The response would be a cacophony of gunshots as the military police fired their rifles and submachine guns into the massed crowd. At the end of the 15-second burst of gunfire, 12 in the crowd would lay dead, and 26 others were wounded. This massacre would be too much for the French diplomats in The Hague, who broke off negotiations immediately. It was also too much for the French military, who intensified border skirmishes that had been occurring over the past few months. The Second Weltkrieg, 1940 to 1947. June 28, 1940, at 0530 hours, would see the beginning of a general French offensive and the beginning of the war, the Second Weltkrieg. German positions in Nancy and Lothringen would be pounded with artillery and harassed by scouting parties. The next day would see the Union of Britain deliver its own war declaration to the German Empire, with the Socialist Republic of Italy following suit on the 30th. July would see the next phase of the Internationale offensive begin, as several resistance cells in Nancy, Lothringen, and Belgium would rise up against their local garrisons. Many failed to immediately take their cities and objectives, but would sow enough chaos to assist the French offensive. The offensive in question chose to smash through the Ludendorff line on the Franco-German border, probing attacks and military intelligence revealing the defensive line much weaker than originally anticipated. This wide front offensive into the Reichspakt consisted of three main thrusts. The first was a broad invasion of Nancy and Alsace-Lothringen. The second was a spearhead through the Ardennes, and the last was an assault on the city of Dunkirk. Sparing the details, the French offensive, later bolstered and supplemented by forces from Britain and Italy, would be a rousing success. The German and Belgian forces fought valiantly, but the close of the year would see them retreating across the Rhine. Tensions would rise between the Internationale and the Netherlands over accusations of the latter supplying Reichspakt forces besieging at Antwerp, culminating in an ultimatum to the Dutch that would effectively turn them into a puppet state of the Internationale. This would be rejected, and the war would be declared against the Dutch. Matters would be further complicated with the death of the Kaiser, as Wilhelm II would pass away from a pulmonary embolism roughly 11 months after the start of the war. June of 1941 would also see the entry of the Russian state into the war, as another blow against the German sphere and empire. But details of the Eastern Front will be omitted here and further explained in the Russian State Progress Report, and a wider one of the events of the Second Weltkrieg. Stay tuned. What is important is that many German divisions are forced eastward in order to assist their allies in defending against Russia. With German attention focused on Europe, a surprise attack by the Japanese Navy would signal the start of the war in the Pacific, which will also be explained in more detail at a later date. Celebrations of the Kaiser's death would occur in Paris, along with much welcome news of the fall of Rotterdam and The Hague, with the Reichspakt falling back to Amsterdam. The fall of these cities would allow the Internationale to bridge the Rhine, and a powerful offensive to force the crossings would be launched and quickly see success. The situation along the Rhine would be declared untenable, and the Germans began to slowly retreat towards Frankfurt, fighting for every inch of land. January of 1942 would see the breakthrough of a glimmer of hope as the Danubian Federation entered the war against both the Internationale and Russia, bringing much-needed manpower to the Reichspact's aid. On the political front, the succeeding Kaiser, Wilhelm III, would unceremoniously dump Reichschancellor Karl Severing for his failures to protect the German state, and appoint his friend Kurt von Schleicher in his place. Schleicher would quickly form a broad right-wing coalition of his own, allying the Zentrum and NLP with the DKP, while also working to break up the radicals on both sides of the spectrum. Through Schleicher's machinations, both the SPD and DVLP suffered factional splits, with the latter facing a near-total collapse following the formation of the DVRP. 1942 would see the beginning of the bitter siege of Wilhelmshaven, and after the capture of most cities on the banks of the northern Rhine, that of Frankfurt. Though while Wilhelmshaven would eventually be abandoned, Frankfurt would stand defiant, becoming a stronghold against the Internationale advance. Fearing a thrust from the south, the Internationale would attempt to take the city of Stuttgart, but would be checked by German divisions and later Danubian reinforcements. 1942 would also see cracks beginning to show in the French military, something the German High Command had taken note of. 1943 and 1944 would see the first reversals of the Internationale in Germany, as the now fully mobilized, equipped, and motivated German Heer would finally go on the offensive. While the struggles of those 2 years were fierce and costly, by July of 1944 the Internationale would be forced back across the Rhine. September of that year would see the long-expected Entente invasion of southern France, which would only further strain the French war effort. Germany's final push came in April of 1945, as 1 million men and 4,000 tanks would cross the Rhine. Paratroopers and loyal Freikorps militias would sow chaos in the Internationale's rear, and the entire front would eventually collapse. By June of that year, the Commune of France ordered a full retreat from the Rhineland. By September 1945, with the fall of Brussels to the Reichspakt and Entente forces making gains in the south of France, it appeared that total collapse was imminent. Mid-month would see a successful German thrust into northern France, and Paris would be placed under threat. The government of France would flee to Nantes, declaring their intentions to resist until the end. However, Paris was spared from destruction. As German troops quickly approached Paris, whatever resistance put up against them would eventually be pushed aside and the city taken. After a final renewed offensive by both the Reichspakt and the Entente, the French government in Nantes would reconsider their earlier declaration and agree to an unconditional surrender. The war in the West was over, though the Union of Britain would tenaciously hold out for nearly 2 more years. All right, let's go to the next part. Let's go to the actual stuff. The new state, January 1st, 1948, which is when the actual game will start. The surrender of the Union of Britain just days before had brought the Second Weltkrieg to a close, with the overwhelming display of raw destructive power that decimated the city of Portsmouth in a flash that was Hemdar. The German Empire stood victorious once more, but at a steep cost. Millions of Germans lie dead, and millions more left homeless or destitute. The Russian threat still looms large beyond the Dnieper, while forces in the east were utterly routed by Japan. The war might have been won, and Germany's strength highlighted by the power of Hemdar. But there is the eternal question. Germany may have won the war, but will they survive the peace? The 8-year-long war against the Internationale has left deep wounds on the German Empire and the German people. Much of the Rhineland lies devastated, having suffered under French occupation. Now that the war has been won, Germany can finally stop to pick up the pieces once again. Reconstruction is a top priority, especially in the Rhineland. Simultaneously, Reichschancellor Ferdinand von Bredau has his eyes set on a total transformation of the German political system, der neue Staat. Since succeeding Kurt von Schleicher as Reichschancellor in 1946, Ferdinand von Bredlow's term has been largely smooth sailing. Strongly convinced that strong centralized governance is the way forward for Germany, Reichschancellor Bredau is gathering support for his own reforms, consolidating power around his political movement. The newly established Deutsches National Einsfront, German National Unity Front, referred to here on out as the DNE. For the first year of the game, gameplay will center around beginning reconstruction and slowly progressing with the new state reforms, as the Empire enjoys a honeymoon period following their victory. At the same time, a small crisis will develop in Britain. In the dying days of the Union of Britain, General Fieldsmarschall Eberhard von Mackensen occupied the southern coast of England, which provided Germany with a bargaining chip to punish the British for the damages caused during the Second Weltkrieg. As Mackensen's forces begin to overstay its welcome, Britain will organize the Oxford Conference to negotiate an end to the German occupation. What follows is a detailed event chain going back and forth between the two nations, as Germany makes harsh punitive demands with the aim of pacifying the United Kingdom for the foreseeable future. On very rare occasions, this can lead to a resumption of hostilities between Germany and the members of the soon-to-be Accord. However, cooler heads will usually prevail, and Germany will succeed in their aims to greatly weaken London through the Oxford Treaty. So, there it is. Next up, the Cologne Crisis. However, the smooth sailing will not last. In March 1949, tensions flare in the Rhineland. Historically a bastion of socialist support, the people of the area now chafe against the increasing levels of authoritarianism and anti-liberalism within Germany. Coupled with the harsh economic conditions within the devastated area, Cologne and the surrounding cities have become a hotbed of unrest. This eventually comes to a head after a bloody clash between protesters and Freikorps units. Following this, the city of Cologne descends into chaos. The Cologne Crisis represents the first true test of Bredau's government and can have widespread ramifications. The main crux of the crisis is a densely packed event chain which will take very careful navigation to handle well. If you mess up, then Bredau can lose the Kaiser's favor and face his political downfall, or be assassinated outright. However, should you navigate this challenge successfully as Bredau, or if another DNE loyalist is appointed Reichskanzler, then the government will be stronger for it and will be free to finish their consolidation of power through the new state reforms and focus trees. Should Bredau fail, however, there is always the option of returning to the tried and tested 1871 Constitution. Enter Dr. Karl Friedrich Gördiler, the current leader of the ailing German Conservative Party, and as expected a staunch national conservative. The experienced and respected politician plans to dissolve the Breslau dictatorship and reinstate the Prussian constitutionalist system, carrying out reforms only where they are desperately needed to update the archaic constitution. To complete his undertaking, however, Gordier will need to gather necessary support for his plans in the Reichstag, which will make use of our new Reichstag and Bundestag GUI. End of an era. On the 20th of July, 1951, Kaiser Wilhelm III dies peacefully in his sleep from an apparent heart attack, putting an end to his rather short tenure. Nationwide, there is mourning and celebration of his life. 3 times Germany faced France on the battlefield, and each time a Wilhelm led Germany to victory. Like his great-grandfather, Kaiser Wilhelm I, and his father, Kaiser Wilhelm II, Kaiser Wilhelm III led Germany through trying times and prevailed over adversity. His death marks the end of an era. The past century was characterized by Germany's meteoric rise to becoming a superpower, and now they have not only obtained their place in the sun, but also wield the power of the sun itself. It is now up to his eldest son and heir, Crown Prince Wilhelm Friedrich Franz Joseph Christian Olaf, to maintain and protect Germany in the decades to come. Assuming the regnal name of Wilhelm IV, the newly crowned Kaiser is staunchly conservative and very keen on being involved politically, meaning very little will politically change, at least initially. The new Kaiser has a priority mission, sorting out the succession, with his once extremely controversial wife Dorothea now being too old to safely bear another child. The Kaiser has been left without an heir. Instead, the heir presumptive is Wilhelm's extremely liberal brother, Louis Ferdinand, already well known for his seditious opinions on the Cold War and the Accord. If the dangerously destabilizing rule of his brother is to be avoided, Wilhelm will need to amend the succession laws to allow his daughters to inherit. That in itself, however, is very likely to run into opposition and could potentially uproot the current political order in Germany if not managed carefully. And that will do it for the Kaiserreich, for now at least. Before we go, we cannot tease something else. Here is the starting army tree as a parting gift. Oh shoot, I don't have it. Hold on. Let me pull that up. Oh wait, no, that was it. That's the starting army tree. Made a couple of mistakes there. All right, well, that's it for the progress report number 2 of Kalterkrieg, where we actually take a look at Germany. The main topic of debate seems to be, are you going to go with liberalizing Germany under Wilhelm IV's brother, or are you going to go for, your Kaiser waifu daughter instead? Looking forward to the fan art of that. Hopefully they're not minors. But please let me know what you thought about me doing this in sort of audiobook style. If not, if you guys don't like it, I'd be happy to go back to the way I do it, where I kind of mostly summarize instead. And then you could read the word for word on your own time. Links will be in the description below. I'm Conquering History Games. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.